Okay, and I believe we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Harp and Guitar, People and Music. And thanks for joining us once again here today for Blues Chat number 6 here. It's been a while, and we're glad to be back. Of course, yours truly, Whiskey, and joining me as always, my partner and my good pal, Monk Music. Howdy, Monk. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. I can't. But is this number 6?
Yeah, number 6 already.
Gosh, I
for
can't
this
believe we've
Blues
done
Chat.
6.
Yeah.
I always thought we'd done 2. That's incredible.
Well, it's been a while, so maybe that's why
Yeah,
it feels
3.
like. So, how's everything going over there across the pond? How you feeling? How's everything
Doing
going?
very well. I'm glad to report that I'll soon be. Well, in fact, tomorrow I need to restring my acoustic and my electric guitar and start playing again because I've had to have a massive layoff because of my shoulder, and it has been absolute agony. So you'll have to pardon me for not posting any guitar vids. It's just I was told that to stop it, I'll have to pack
not a
in
problem.
exercise and anything that's highly repetitious. Well, obviously playing the guitar has damaged it over the years, and what's happened is the on my right shoulder, when you hold your arm in one position for hours on end, it happens to hairdressers when they cut hair or any high repetitious or sten pull people. The high repetition with the hands, the shoulder girdle gets, all the muscles get messed up. So sorry, boring detail, but it's been agony to play. So after like 20 minutes of playing, it just locks up, and it's stabbing pain. So it's all gone now, so I can start to play. I will obviously go and do my usual, because I was at one point doing 4 or 5 hours on a trot, getting back into some serious form, because I really want to get back on stage. So in order to do that, I need to do a lot of listening, playing along, and copying riffs and stuff. And like I said, I mean, the amount of time I spent listening to B.B. King, Buddy Guy, I've made a start on Jimi Hendrix as well. But to get the touch takes, you can play the riff within seconds, but to get the feel takes quite a long time, hours.
Yeah,
Anyway.
for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's painful when you were playing because it was physically affecting your shoulder, but then when you had to stop playing, it was kind of painful too, because I know you have a deep passion for it. So yeah, that must have been tough.
Oh, it drove me nuts.
It probably gave you the blues. So there you go.
You're not kidding. Well, imagine I've been playing since the age of 15, and when I was between 15 and going to university, I was playing. I mean, it compromised my exams in the end. I sort of knocked it off for the revision phase, but I used to I've had my practice up there at 8 and 10 hours at the peak when I was really going for it early on. Then I sort of let it drift for a career, and then over the last 2 years, I've begun to pick it up and up and up and up, which, of course, I'm hoping you've noticed.
Oh, definitely.
Just going through the styles. I mean, a few weeks ago, before I stopped, I looked. I sort of think I got home about 6 o'clock. I looked. Next thing you know, it's 1:30, and I'm still playing. So,
yeah.
and I think that took me over the edge of damaging it. So I've got to be careful this time. And I realize what it is that playing that acoustic a lot, sitting down, I'm carrying the shoulder. Whereas standing up with the electric guitar or with a strap on the acoustic, my arm's dangling down, and the actual exercise physically is a little less taxing. So I'll have to start playing standing up.
Well, so, plus the body on your electric guitar isn't as wide or as thick as the body on your acoustic. So it's forcing your arm at the elbow point to be pushed outward a little bit further, and therefore your shoulder is at that outstretched angle a little bit more, right?
Yes, and also, I mean, I used to have a Martin Dreadnought, and that was huge. And,
yeah, those are big. Yeah,
well, yeah, it was almost too big for me. I shouldn't have bought it. I had the option to take a Martin guitar as well for similar money. If I'd have paid another couple of £100, I would have had a really beautiful Martin, and that wasn't too big, and it was just beautiful sound. But anyway, the Guild went out. With the Guild, I used to get a blue arm because it had cut the blood off my arm, so I couldn't feel my hand. My whole arm went cold, and I had it blue a couple of times. Tinged grey, shall we call it?
Yeah.
With fingers that look like sort of lard Which is very weird and tingling, and then tingling. I thought, oh, I better stop. So I take your arm away, and all the blood comes pouring. And you get massive pins and needles. So that
Not exactly good for plucking the strings, that's for sure.
Not
Hey,
really.
MGTOW Warrior's here. Hey, Warrior.
Oh, hi,
Welcome.
Warrior.
Thanks a lot.
How you doing?
Thanks a lot for coming by, Warrior. Appreciate it. So today is and there's a couple of birthdays in and around this date in the blues world. So I thought I'd just quickly mention. Just a couple of days ago, on December the 5th, it was Sonny Boy Williamson, #2, was his birthday. Or at least that's the best guess. Birth records back then weren't like they are now. And also, he was known to be a teller of tall tales and often miscited his own birth date. But best guess is that Sonny Boy Williamson was born December 5th. He's also known as Alec Rice Miller, because there was two Sonny Boys. Alec Miller was Sonny Boy #2. That's our avatar here for this channel. And on this same date, actually, December 5th, Little Richard. I'm a huge fan of Little Richard as well as Sonny Boy. I love Little Richard. Fantastic vocals, great boogie woogie piano. And one of the founding fathers of early rock and roll, you know. Yes, and a hell of a showman. You're right. Let's see. December 9th coming up will be Mr. Junior Wells' birthday. A fantastic blues harp player. Did a lot of touring with Buddy Guy through the 70s, and they did a lot of duet albums together. They opened for the Rolling Stones, a lot of American stops on the Stones tours in the 70s. And December the 10th, Guitar Slim, who, speaking of Buddy Guy often cites Guitar Slim as being a huge influence on him, especially the song The Things I Used to Do, which he said after Boogie Chillin' was the songs that made him want to play guitar. Jolly Hooker's Boogie Chillin' and Guitar Slim's The Things I Used to Do. So cool. There we go. Happy birthday, belated, and coming up for Sonny Boy and Little Richard, Junior Wells, Guitar Slim. And actually born on this day, the Reverend Blind John Davis, who played sort of a gospel blues and played in a similar style to Blind Lemon Jefferson.
And hello, are you there, Whiskey?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, I was listening. I was just listening to you. I do calm down and listen to your golden tones. It's a few weeks ago now, and I feel like I've let the side down a bit. I went to see a band a few weeks ago, if you remember, called 9 Below Zero, and you need to check them out, folks. They were a modern day blues band. They were around in the late 70s, early 80s, and they're still going. They reformed to create a Motown-esque band to compete with the Jam in the mid-80s, and they reformed again after that to be 9 Below Zero again. I was lucky enough to get agreement. Oh, I'm going to say it out loud. I don't want to say it. Look, I spoke to their lead singer, Dennis Greaves, and he did agree at that brief meeting at that gig to allow us to interview him. So hopefully we'll get around to organising that. At the moment, they're on tour with the band from the Jam, so they're all over the map at the moment in the UK.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say they're based out of the UK, but they tour the United States as well, and they've done their what's the term I'm looking for? They paid their dues playing in Chicago many times through the 70s and 80s. So
it's a great,
it's a great pleasure and a great honor to definitely to be in touch with those fellas. And I've seen their stuff on YouTube, and they're a fine blues band. Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
And 9 Below Zero was a famous Sonny Boy song, actually.
Yes, that's right. That's obviously where they got the name from. And what's his name did it on his latest album, didn't he? Buddy Guy.
Yeah, it's become a kind of a blues standard, actually.
Yeah. So like I said, I spoke to Dennis. They've still got the same harp player, and he's incredible, absolutely incredible. They were so tight, and they just did it like, you know, just like, what is it? They played like ringing a bell. It was just great.
Yeah.
And it was the second time I'd actually spoken to Dennis. The first time was in 19, and I was never going to remember this because, you know, I was just a fan. And I saw The Truth, his second band, in 1984, I think it was. Yeah, it was 1984. And so I spoke to him then. And so 34 years later, I speak to him again. And I said, well, you won't remember this. Obviously not. But yeah, like I said, he's agreed to talk to us and gives his insights into the blues. There's another guy locally here called Ben Ruth, who plays with the Chicago Blues Explosion around the north of England. He also plays in Chicago, brings a lot of talented American blues players over to Lancaster. And there's, who else is there? There's that guy who's the can't remember his name now. I do beg your pardon. Who's the one-man band blues player I got on video a few weeks ago. I'm so sorry, I can't remember his title. And there's another guy I'd like to reach out to, who is the Blues Guitar World fella, who posts superb blues riffs and licks every day. He's extremely good channel, and I can't believe he gets 1 and 2 views, and it's sickening because this guy's completely talented. He's just superb. It's more of a modern rock type blues, but he posts a riff every day and he never misses. And they're all different and they're all good and they're excellent. And I feel like really bad for him because I'm the only one commenting. And I might sometimes be the only person watching.
Or often than not, you find these gems on YouTube, and
oh yeah,
you wonder, like, why isn't this guy like? Yeah, I've seen that guy you talk about, really talented. Yeah. You wonder why isn't this guy up?
Yeah, you know? And he's playing his Les Paul, and he's got the blues obviously in blue, and I don't know if he's Japanese or what. Not that makes any odds. I really don't know, but he's a fine guitarist. So please sub to Blues Guitar World and tell him we sent you. Another band that I'm hoping to get in touch with is the little band. I'll post the link in the low bar after, if that's all right.
Sure,
can't remember it. But I watched that video being filmed coincidentally, and I think I spoke to you as it was being filmed, didn't I?
Yes.
You know what I mean? It was on the corner. It was on the corner. And this guy's swinging, man. He's I'd say he's mid to late 50s, maybe even early 60s, and he's got some serious energy. Absolutely brilliant. So it's good to, basically, I guess I'm rambling, but it's good to report blues is alive and well, and there's a full generation coming through, which is awesome for me.
Yes, absolutely. That fella you were mentioning, the one-man band, Phil Saunders.
Phil Saunders, that's right. I've got his album. I bought it. Very, very good, very talented, and he actually made his own resonator guitar out of an oil drum, not a jerry can. If you watch the video, so and I've got him on video agreeing to be interviewed by you, Whiskey, since we are international.
Yeah, so there you have it. Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's great to see, like you said, that the blues is alive and well. You know, it's great to see that there's a lot of these younger fellas that not only do they have the skills to play it, but they understand it. They understand the history behind it. You know, and that's sort of the importance that I place. That's sort of the role that I try to play here on this channel is reminding everybody that, yeah, these are catchy tunes, and yeah, that bend sounds really awesome there, and it makes you want to get up and shake your butt. But there's a lot more to it. There's stories behind these lyrics. There's meaning behind the content, and there's a history behind the musicians. And
that's right.
To me, that's a very important aspect about the blues. I mean, every musical genre has, you know, their historical figures and icons, but because the blues is a true, unique American musical art form, and now has gone completely around the world and has made its way back to the United States for, like you said, this new generation. So now we're seeing blues coming, you know, initially out of the US, then it was coming out of Europe, and now it's gone all around the world. And a new generation has picked up the torch. So it's fantastic. You know, that's something that's, the blues will never die, right?
I like to think so. I mean, there's even been a recent, oh, crying out loud, must be tired. Irish fella, guitarist, what do you call him? I can't think for the life of me. My brain's gone. Rory Gallagher. Rory Gallagher, yeah, Rory Gallagher. There was an album out last year before, of some of his later stuff. So that must mean there's the market for it, which is good to know.
Yeah.
And looking at the hits on Messing with a Kid video that's done in Germany, that's a lot of hits. So it seems to be turning, you know, just ticking away nicely. It's a great starting point for a lot of rock bands. I don't think it is a rite of passage for many lasses playing the guitar. It's a great stepping stone. If they choose to stay, it would be even better. But it just means even if it is used as a stepping stone, it's still a great basis for keeping the blues alive.
Sure.
Or Buddy Guy, the odd riff here. Of course, I'm trying to develop the style and be able to ape them. I don't want to be either of them, but I used to be. I wanted to be Buddy Guy, as you know. But it's good to drop down and do it. People go, "Oh, wow, that's exciting. How did you learn that? Who's, you know, who taught you that?" And you go, and then you start talking. And if you remember when you spoke to Ben, you immediately hit it off because you were talking about who's your main influences and all this stuff. And that guy, Phil Saunders, he had his lineage. And I think the special thing with the blues, certainly from my perspective, is that you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, which is great. You're in the chain, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
and there is kind of a chain because there are links, and a lot of things can be harkened back to direct influences, indirect influences. I think I mentioned earlier in the chat here that, you know, I hold Sonny Boy Williamson, well, both of them, but Sonny Boy Williamson, #2, in very high regard. He's one of my favorite harp players, and Junior Wells is as well. And Sonny Boy gave Junior some pointers, right? So you can see how there's this, like you said, they're part of something bigger than them. There's a lineage, there's a link.
Yeah, it's a real privilege to be connected to it all. I know it sounds a bit over the top, but it's true. I mean, yeah, like I said, I'm looking at this album now. It's a compilation I got given for my birthday, Chicago Blues, the Absolute Essential 3 CD collection, and it's all from about 1953, I think, 1950, up to, I think the latest one's about 1969, something like that, 58. Hang on a minute, 59. Mid-60s anyway. Well, mostly 50s, 61 there. And they're all the classics. And I've been listening to it on the way to work and back home. And it's just glorious. And there's things I've never heard, you know. And even now, I still haven't had a chance to look at the sleeve. So I'm being influenced by all these riffs. I don't know who gave them to me. So, excuse me, it's very interesting listening to people like, surprise, surprise, one of my faves is Sit and Cry by Buddy Guy. It's very early Buddy Guy. And the opening riff, having studied that album, that opening riff is really, it was just Buddy Guy through and through. So it's fab. It's really good. And what was that one I was playing you just before we went live?
Two-Headed Woman, Junior Wells?
No, it was I Can't Quit You, Baby. Otis Rush it was.
Oh, yeah, Otis Rush, I Can't Quit You. Yeah, the one where he's, whoa,
that's
I Can't Quit You, Baby.
It's just so good. I love it. I know. I always end up going, "Oh, it's just great," and it is. It's just ace. And I've had it all my life. I mean, since that, and I still don't know where the album is. If I find it, I'll be screaming. That'll be a full 3 hours of taking that album to bits. You know the one I mean? It's a yellow and it's either orange and black or yellow and black. Blues Masters Volume 2. Which there must be about 20 albums named that Blues Masters Volume 2. And
every time I'm on Amazon or eBay or go to my local record shop, I look for that and I can't find it.
Well, you can find it.
Very rare.
It's got Left-Handed Frank on it because I'd never heard of any other place where Left-Handed Frank's on it. and Buddy Guy, and it's got what do you call it? The Garbage Man Blues on it, which is a bit of a classic, a total classic, because it's got the key change opening, goes from C to A, and then this other, I can't remember the name of the track, to be honest, Left-Handed Frank. So the only one I remember off the album to hear is the Buddy Guy track, because it really resonated with me, you know. You know what?
Oh, yeah.
I don't go for that shit. And it was really cool. And the playing was just aggressive and sweet, and all things in between. It was just great. So it's Left-Handed Frank. So if anybody out there knows this album, it's got Left-Handed Frank and Buddy Guy. It's a compilation of some of these blues masters. I've never seen it for years. I'm hoping it's in the loft somewhere covered in dust, but I played it and played, you know, the Dansette record players.
Yes.
I basically put the album cover to one side, the guitar on, and I was playing it and 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 playing it, trying to go through and be in the right key. And of course, it sounded terrible. And I just kept going, and my mother got sick of it. Is that the only record you've got? What about your ABBA records?
Yeah, no kidding. I remember getting that a lot as a kid too, for sure.
I'm sick of hearing that. It's all you do. Yeah, but I've got to get this riff, you know, and that's the only way. I mean, that's all there was. You know, you play it and play it and play it and play it, and then we'd go and jam through stuff with my mate Gary, a couple of miles away, and then we'd spend all Saturday afternoon. The tradition was between the two of us, and I'm sure lots of lads used to do this. We'd swap guitars. So he got this really rubbish Merlin guitar. Oh, honestly. And I put his beautiful Gretsch Country Gentleman on, and it was this amazing,
nice.
Yeah, I know, with a big Bigsby on it. There's a white cream mother of pearl inlay on the beading, a beautiful guitar.
I always thought Gretsch were beautiful guitars. They're
lovely.
Their string guitars and their guitars are beautiful. Yeah,
it's beautiful, and we played it through his amp. I can't remember what that was, but it was a FAL speaker, FAL speaker, and the guitar I had cost, I don't know, a few pence. And when you got beyond the 13th fret, it was so badly made that the string touched the pickup. So you couldn't play beyond the 13th, 14th fret, maybe, because it was literally, and the action on it must have been 8 mil. It was enormous. You couldn't play it really beyond the, say, 9th fret. I loved it, and I played it today. I had this rubbish, oh gosh, where's this coming from? I had this rubbish little black 5-watt amp with a 2-foot wire, and it was all plastic. It was complete garbage, but I was so excited because I had an electric guitar and an amp, and that put you up the food chain with the chicks, you know.
Well, and that's all it takes, right? That's the spark that you can fan into the flame, your passion for the music, that first seed that's planted, and then it's up to you to cultivate that. And like you said, keep listening to records and seeking out more records. I can remember trading records with guys. I'd go to the record stores or used record shops, and pick up records and listen to them for a couple of weeks, lend them out to friends and trade them for other records they had, and, you know, borrow them for a couple of weeks and then trade back again. And, you know, that really helped to develop my passion for it, but also to expand it and find out about different bluesmen and find out about different artists, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I love Buddy Guy and Howlin' Wolf and Sonny Boy and Junior Wells, but if that's all I was exposed to, I'd be missing out on literally thousands and thousands of other talented artists going back to the, you know, 1920s, right? So, you know, I would have missed out on perhaps the Blind Lemons and the Sister Rosetta Tharps of the world.
You see, Sister Rosetta Tharp's new to me this year, if you think about it. I mean, I had a whole sort of golden period of about 3 years up to going to university, then that kicked in, and women. And then when I got down to the south of England, working down there, my line manager, Brian, he was a massive blues fan, and he had all these I forgot to mention, I don't think I've ever told you this, actually. He had all these reel-to-reel blues recordings.
Okay.
From the radio at, like, you know, 2 in the morning. and stuff like songs with names like or of the ilk, 4 o'clock at the Greasy Spoon, 4 a.m. in the Greasy Spoon. You'll probably know the proper name of the track I'm referring to. And some of them were really quite sleazy in title and in lyric. And
Sure.
I remember him telling me all about it. There was a massive blues fan. And we really been, at the time, I couldn't really pay much more than lip service because I was working and chasing girls. So I have to admit, there I said it. I can't believe I compromised my blues exploration for chasing women about. But that's all part of the blues experience, folks. Yeah, so now in the last 2 years, having rediscovered it, if you like, and or beginning to move away from work a little bit at my age, I can begin to, reflect and think, so this thing I discovered as a kid, I'm now rediscovering, and it's such an exciting time. I mean, it actually got me to school, because I'd get to school and there were people like, well, my mate Gary, he had the Gretchen. He'd show me the odd lick. He said, try bending. If you stuck with your bends at the 5th fret, try doing it at the 10th fret. I said, well, I can't get much beyond the 9th. He said, so with that rubbish guitar. But I did. I remember for hours driving my dad nuts. I'd have a unplugged crummy Merlin, it was. You can Google it, I'm sure. Oh, that's the thing now. You can Google it. It was an awful colour. It was brown, sunburst, but done really badly, and a small little body on it with one rubbish pickup that you couldn't adjust. But I loved it. And I bend it and bend it and bend it and bend it and bend it. And then when I discovered how to bend to meet the next note, you could get the sort of rock and roll sound. And if I cranked the amp up and really hit the guitar hard, I could get a little bit of crush. Because you got to remember, I had no money to go out and buy effect pedals. No money to go and buy a posh amp. We weren't exactly well off, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
In fact, far from
I get
it.
I get it. But you don't necessarily need any of that, especially when it comes to just playing a straight up 12-bar blues. I mean, look at Johnny Winter, one of my favorite blues guitarists of all time. Definitely, for me, I would consider in the top 10 of all time, Johnny Winter. And he would plug straight into the amp. He didn't use any pedals. He didn't use a whammy bar. Maybe he played around with it a bit in the 60s and 70s, but for his straight up blues, it was just his guitar and his amp.
Yeah, passion's the best.
Sometimes a slide, he was a great slide player.
I believe passion for what you're playing is the best effect. Do you know what I mean?
Johnny Winter.
Looking like a complete. Like I said, I know I often refer to the book by Harvey Vinson, lead guitar, and you can find that on eBay, but not the edition I had, and it was, I think, quite an early edition. Anyway, it cited. I've forgotten his name now. You just mentioned him.
Gosh, Johnny Winter.
Yeah, it cited Johnny Winter, and it cited bands like Uriel and Egg, and lots of these guitar players I really never heard of. But this, in fact, I can remember my first riff, and I thought, I'll never get this. But I kept going and I kept going. But like I said, this crummy guitar, and you discover that, the tie a wire, B.B. King, tie a wire and make a diddly bow down a wall. So he's got a couple of rocks. I'm thinking, well, if he can do that, I can do this with this crummy guitar. And after a while, I think I saved up. We got a tiny little K amp with a speaker so small you couldn't believe it, but it was still louder than that plastic thing. And then I got a Fender. What was it? It was a Fender. Oh, that's right, a Fender Bullet, which is basically a Telecaster with one pickup and no switch. And I love that guitar. Oh, I played that to death. Yeah,
a lot of the great blues guitarists started off just playing a diddly bow with wire, and that, even Buddy Guy in his book talks about he used to pull wire out of the screen, the screens that cover the windows, the bug screens. He'd pull wire out of that and stretch that between some nails on a board, and he would always catch hell from his parents for doing that.
Well, I used to catch hell all the time. be 3 o'clock in the morning usually. I remember falling asleep and being woken up by the guitar falling off the bed and making a row. So you'd have the amp on, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd be practicing my bending or hammering on, and or just doing a riff in the dark and then try and repeat it up the neck. Just something simple, you know, like I've shown sometimes, just using 4 notes and doing a little lick and trying to get it faster or trying to get it smoother or put the tremolo in. Oh, and the amount of time on the BB King tremolo, sorry, the BB King vibrato, crying out loud. Gee whiz, to get that down, it takes some amount of practice. You can't press too hard. You've got to twiddle your hand about, and it looks ever so easy. So I developed a technique that's similar. It's not the same because he does a simple rotate at high speed, and I'm beginning to develop that even now. It's difficult to do, but I developed this sort of pull technique that resembles it, and now I can do a first finger vibrato at the end of a phrase as a natural thing. So it took some getting to that. And the other thing is just slinging time into the box 1 on the minor pentatonic blues scale. That's honestly anyway. Sorry, I'm harping on. If you pardon the expression.
No, but that's something that took BB King almost, you know, the first third of his career to develop, as he developed his own sound, right? That we now all recognize as BB King's style. You know, that took him probably the better part of a decade to really develop, because as you and I have talked about before, when I was playing you some of BB King's early recordings, you know, you said his style is completely different.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
didn't have that trilling on the string. He would bend, but he didn't have that, what did you call it, tremolo or vibrato or whatever.
You could tell also that he's finding his way. He didn't know his way. And I know there's a time as you're playing that you know that you're not up to the mark because you've not internal, and that's grandiose of me to say that, but anybody who plays guitar would probably identify what I'm talking about. You know the scale, you can finger it, you can get through it, you can do the exercises really quite well, but to start soloing over a chord sequence is a heck of a journey. You've got to do a gargantuan, and this is why I always feel like a fraud, right? In order to do it, you have to listen and listen and listen and listen. You can't do it without. And I don't feel like I've listened enough. You know what I've said?
Well, but that's the thing, though, that even at that point early in his career, BB King wasn't yet BB King, right? He was still the blues boy, the Beale Street blues boy, Riley B. King, from where was he from? Angola, Mississippi, I believe. You know, and his first recordings were made at the radio station that he worked at as a DJ. So while he had the talent, I mean, he was winning talent shows before he got that job. That's part of how he got that job. I mean, he was destroying everybody in his immediate vicinity because he had the talent and he was already well on his way. But yeah, you're right. He was still sort of finding his way. He was still on his journey to becoming not just Riley B. King, the Beale Street blues boy, but becoming the late great BB King, right? Yeah. The blues ambassador.
That's right. I mean, what he was doing on those early recordings he played was to work through the scale and put a twiddle on the end. Really quite ploddy. Towards the once he hit form, there was not one note that wasn't beautifully crafted, like the Sing gig. That's just just a tour de force of guitaring. You know the one I mean, when they're in the prison.
Yes. Yeah.
1969, I think.
Yeah. How blue can you get?
How blue can you get? That's the main one.
Yeah.
Well, the introduction to that is just it's a manual. It's an instructional.
Yes.
And I was working before my shoulder went wallop. I was working through that because a guy's transcribed it on YouTube. So if you are interested, I can't remember the name of the channel, but if you put intro to How Blue Can He Get by BB King lesson, this guy breaks it down riff by riff, and it's amazing. You think, well, is that all it is? But it's not that. That's not the point. It's the way it's done, the place that it's done, and the expression behind it. It's just incredible. Because he does this little lick here, and he shoots up the neck, and does his come back and do the trem, and then he'll do a little bit of a chromatic run, playing every note, and you think, oh, that's total BB King, and it distills the essence of BB King. It's just genius.
Sure.
I mean,
Let me just, I just want to quickly, just to punctuate your point, just want to read a little bit from Buddy Guy's book called When I Left Home. And he talks about BB King and the influence that BB had on him. I'm just quoting here briefly. This is from page 39 of Buddy Guy's book. He says, I was in love with BB's style from the time I heard 3 O'Clock Blues. His guitar had a ring and a sting that snapped back my head. His sound gave me chills. So yeah, that's an excellent way to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Fantastic. Fantastic. In fact, that wasn't always his opening riff. Sorry?
Don't forget, BB had that powerful gospel-tinged voice. I mean, man, oh man.
It could have been a singer, easy.
Sure. I mean, even if he didn't play guitar at all, which would have been a shame, and probably would have rippled to the effects of would have rippled through to today for sure if there was no such thing as BB King. But that being said, yeah, if he had never picked up Lucille and was just a stand-up blues singer like Bobby Blue Bland, for example, he still would have been huge. His voice was just unparalleled. Again, the gospel, the passion, outstanding.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
All right. Well, they put out a tight band as well, and they worked so hard. I mean, think about how many gigs they were doing every night, sometimes twice an evening. So, you know, knocking it out. How long were they in that bus for?
Yeah, well, they did over 300 shows a year on average.
There you go. So that's a hell of a work rate. So,
and that was just when he was doing the Chitlin circuit in the South. I mean, once he became, you know, BB King, the ambassador of the blues, and was going to Japan and Russia and Germany and Spain and, you know, all over the world. Like you said, that's where they would do, you know, 2 Saturday shows, a Sunday matinee, you know.
And all the albums.
Yes, and all the albums. I mean, BB was pumping out the albums, man. I mean, some of it wasn't his best stuff, but he was pumping out albums for, you know, from the 50s right through until, you know, the 2000s. I mean, what in the hell?
And rejigging songs and revisiting them and making them more modern and more relevant and all the rest of it, and refining his technique and training other musicians. What was it he said in that video? Give me 70% man, 30% musician. I can sort the rest out.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they've got the passion and they've got the attitude, I can turn you into music. So he's obviously coaching as well. So he was coaching, writing, developing his technique, promoting the blues, touring. I mean, how hard do you have to work? And for all that effort, to my mind, I know he's internationally recognized, and people sort of, you know, oh, well, everybody knows BB King, but ultimately he didn't get for the work rate. It's totally underrated.
Sure,
completely underrated.
And a lot of these old blues cats back then, they would do that. They were constantly improving their craft because they took it seriously, because they knew that was, for them, really, that was the only way for a lot of them to get out of the situation they were in. And they were influenced by an earlier generation that was maybe trapped on the plantation as a sharecropper, or working, you know, let's say at Stovall's plantation in the South, or in some cases had to force to work on prison work farms. And these guys influenced guys like BB, and then BB came along and influenced the next generation of guys. But they were always improving their craft because they knew it was important. going back to, like you said, there's that link there, that lineage.
That's right.
Even the Howlin' Wolf. I mean, he was already in his 50s and was a huge star in the blues. And he went back to school and he learned to read and write properly. And he also took music lessons after he was already a blues star and had been putting out. He had been having hit singles since the early 50s with Sam Phillips, for crying out loud.
Mm.
And he still went and took music so he could learn to read and write music, sheet music. And that he felt that would help his blues. That would help him as a professional blues musician and performer.
Well, a lot of people have told me over the years that B.B. King wasn't that great at music theory. But I saw a video, you know, the series when he's analysing his technique. He knows all about music theory and where the notes go. There's not one thing he didn't. There's not one thing he did where he didn't know exactly what he was doing musically with regard to the score and where it fits with the bass or the timing with the drums. He knew all that. Very well skilled, and from what I could gather from that video, he a great historian too, because he was influenced by what do you call a French fella, no, Belgian fella, Django Reinhardt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
he was a huge fan of Django Reinhardt.
Yeah, I think BB was quoted as saying Django drove him crazy.
Yeah, well,
he loved him so much. Yeah, he got obsessed with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't he on military service when he discovered Django Reinhardt?
Yeah.
I think somebody bought him an album, didn't they, or something?
Yes. Yeah. Somebody that he was friends with in the military service.
That's right. I think it was Germany, something like that. But yeah, I mean, Django Reinhardt, even now, I know that round here we've got a guy who can play Django Reinhardt, and he's very, very good. He's like lightning on that guitar. And he went over to Belgium. This is just a turn to Tangentville. And they wouldn't let him solo for 3 months. He had to do the chords. So he had to turn it because they wouldn't let him play because they told him, this is with the gypsies in Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't, he couldn't swing. He said, you can't swing. So you're playing chords, you're doing the rhythm till you've got the feel, and then they'll let you loose. Because let's face it, playing fast guitar, anybody can play fast guitar, but to play it with swing is the point with Django.
And that's the thing with BB is that, and going back to, you said he had a tight, hardworking band. Well, that part of BB's sound, a part of what that band was so capable of doing, and so expertly, you hear it in every recording, was that they had that swing, they had that drive. It propelled the song forward. It propelled the music. It did have that swing. And
that's right.
That comes from a lot of that comes from the gospel, and a lot of that comes from how blues was influenced early on from the Louisiana style of blues that was coming out of New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Because they had that jazz tinge to that style of the blues that was coming out of Louisiana. And jazz has a lot of that swing too, because of its syncopations and because of its free-flowing sort of ad-libs that the musicians do. The other thing I want to mention too is that a lot of people, like you were saying, they talk about that BB didn't really know the proper musical theory and all that. And I agree with you. That's not true. The problem always with the blues, and to some respects jazz and ragtime, but the problem always has been with the blues is that they try to twist the blues to fit the proper musical scale, or they try to squeeze and twist the proper European musical scale to fit in with the blues. And they don't quite match up because the blues comes from the pentatonic scale, the African musical scale. And also, a lot of the way these guys played, not only diddly bow and later on guitars and banjos, but the way a lot of them play the harp, the blues harmonica, the blues harp, and even piano to some extent by mashing the keys, was meant to emulate the human voice, because blues was also so massively influenced by earlier proto-blues and pre-blues like field hollers and work songs, where they didn't have instruments. The only instrument they had was their voice. And their voice, of course, would ring out or sing out in the pentatonic scale. Later on, when they became amateur and then professional blues musicians, they carried on that tradition of A, the pentatonic scale, and B, trying to emulate the sounds that the human voice would make on the strings of the guitar. So BB was making his guitar, you could almost say literally sing rather than playing the guitar. BB was trying to make the guitar sing like the human voice sings when he played, especially when he got into becoming BB King.
Yeah, I mean, you just talk, and you can find interviews where he just talk about making a point and then sort of making an opening statement, a backup point, and then a closing statement in the way he plays. And he demonstrates it, that he thinks of it as a conversation.
Yeah, it goes back to what I talk about all the time, that there's they tell stories. These are important stories within these songs.
And to my mind, he's as good live as he is on a recording, if not better, to be honest, because you get the feel and the energy of the atmosphere. I mean, there are a lot of guitar players and a lot of albums you'll listen to, all this more modern stuff. It's too clean, and I've never liked that. And just talking of that, you tend to think, because it's a big band that he was out with, a biggish band, I should say, and it's very soulful and bluesy, that people have this idea that he's not that tech savvy. Well, his sound was very well created and very well planned out. And if he just nudged his volume knob up a little touch, it crushed out. You know what I mean? When it did a little bit of crush. And that's all I ever used to do with the band, is a little bit of crush, please. So no effect. I mean, the only effect would ever use really is a little bit of reverb, just to round it out, and just take it over the edge of. I know this is a punk band and everything, but that was an influence directly. In fact, so much so was my sound basic that we get to one gig in Glasgow one night, and the guy says, "Do you know what you do with that amp?" I said, "Absolutely not." He says, "Can you play guitar?" I said, "Oh, yeah, of course I can. I just don't know how to work this amp." He said, "It's a Marshall amp. Everybody in the universe knows how to turn a Marshall amp on." I didn't have a clue, because and this is so. I mean, obviously this isn't that long ago. It's 6 years ago. Of course I can play, but it's a JCM 800, and now thinking, well, I never wanted one of these, because it's like rock amp. My amp literally is, well, if you're looking it up, it's a Rockaverb, and I'm going to have to do a video on it. It's a Rockaverb 50, which is, I think, a 10 or a 12. I can't remember now. It's a 10 or it's never mattered to me, the details on the amp, by the way. It's just as long as it sounds cool. It's a valve amp, and it'll blow your clothes off.
For the most part, that's how I am with my equipment too, whether it's my amp, my microphone, or even to some extent the harps that I buy. I don't care what the name is on it, as long as it suits my needs, my purpose, sounds good. And of course, like you mentioned, is of at least half decent quality and isn't cheap plastic or what have you.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, like I said, a little bit of crush. Whereas if you listen to what BB was doing, Wade, he taught me, he developed it, and I think he helped develop amp usage and pickups and all sorts, as well as people like Charlie Christian, but that's way, way, way before. So he knew his stuff. He absolutely was totally schooled on the equipment, the guitars, the amps, the string depth, plectrum stuff, all the musical theory. He was absolutely on it. You know, I don't think it's. I mean, I didn't really realize all this till, shall we say, my second attempt at getting into the blues, if you like. An amazing man, and strangely enough, not on this album. This is a bit weird.
Not on which album?
Oh, I knew it says Chicago Blues, so I guess that it says this album, Chicago Blues, Absolute Essential 3 CD collection.
Oh, the one that you were talking about earlier. Oh, okay.
Yeah, very good album.
Man, you couldn't get that would be 20 albums just to get one song from each half decent Chicago blues recording artist from you know, even from one record label for the past 30 years or even 50 years or something. Man, I mean, there's so many great guys coming out of Chicago from, well, but there was great blues coming out of Chicago in the 1920s and 30s. But when you want to talk about the electrified, what we now know as Chicago blues sound, you know, the stuff that was coming out basically late 50s and early 60s, and a lot of the really good gritty stuff in the 70s was just fantastic. Guys like Luther Allison and you know, Bobby Bland, Junior Wells, Buddy Guy, just great stuff. Magic Sam, Big Walter Horton. You know, these guys were just unbelievable. Big Mama Thornton, actually, the original. Big Mama Thornton, the original recorder of Hound Dog, who, by the way, her birthday is right around this time of year as well.
That wasn't a bit rude, Hound Dog?
A bit rude?
A bit naughty?
Well, kind of. The original...
Suggestive, well, not rude.
The original used the traditional double entendre that blues always did, right? The blues always kind of was... not really dirty, but naughty, right? They always use kind of sexually suggestive language, which was really the attention grabber so that you could read the underlying message, you know? But even the term rock and roll is naughty in blues. It means copulation. It means to have sex.
Easy.
Right? So, you know, it's the way that they use the language to have that double or sometimes even triple meaning. But yeah, Big Mama Thornton was the original version of Hound Dog. At one point, she says, "You're just looking for an old soup bone," which is kind of double entendre for sexual organs. They often compared sexual organs of men and women to different food, right? Like jelly rolls and soup bones, and you know. I want some sugar in my bowl. I want a wiener in my bun, that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, the original Hound Dog was a little bit kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know? And it was cleaned up when it was re-recorded by Elvis, I think like 5 years later or something like that. It was quite a while afterwards. But Big Mama had a great voice. And she was a hell of a blues harp player in her own right, actually. Very good harmonica player. And she was right up into the 60s and 70s. She was recording really kind of gritty, sort of really fantastic Chicago electric blues. Like slow blues, real gritty stuff. Fantastic.
Well, it's just great. All of it. I'm just looking in the chat, and I absolutely agree that the old blues masters played by feel, not scale. Now, you're absolutely right. Thing is,
for the most part, a lot of them played in like open A or open E because
that's right, and
that's how they were shown how to tune their guitar from the little manual that came, you know, the little book that came with it, or the little pamphlet that came with the guitar that they would buy for $1.50 from Sears Roebuck, you know?
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of them wouldn't learn a scale. They'd learn a riff and then build a song around it, or maybe 3 chords, and then feel the way. Because a lot of them would get one riff and just, from what I can see, and just play the living daylights out of it and do a range of songs around that riff.
Sure, a lot of famous quote-unquote rock and roll musicians, when they were backing up blues singers, they tell stories about how difficult it was for the key changes and the chord changes, because generally in structured, or, you know, what you would say, I'm using air quotes, structured pop music, let's say like rock and roll, you know, the changes come at specific certain times. But with a lot of the blues fellas, they would just change whenever they felt like it. John Lee Hooker was notorious for doing that. He would just change when he felt like changing. So the backup band would have to watch him for the changes, or just kind of maybe feel when the change was about to come. But it was tough for bands like Canned Heat that backed up John Lee Hooker a lot of times, even though Canned Heat was a great blues band in their own right. And same with Sonny Boy. A lot of rock musicians that backed up Sonny Boy, like the Yardbirds, you know, they again, they had to watch for the changes, and sometimes quickly they would miss by a you know, a bar or two or whatever, or a, you know, because they didn't change at the right time, or they would change and he wouldn't change and he'd give them a dirty look.
Or sometimes a change would keep the same riff, the chord would change and it would actually work. And so that'd be remembered. I know that I didn't realize how much communication there is on stage when you're gigging until I started gigging. And the shouting is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Where are we? Because you could be really tired, 1 a.m, absolutely jiggered, and you sit and you're going, what's the next chord? I can't see straight. I just don't know where I am. It's a D. Right, okay, boom, and off we go.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get lost, you know, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been stuck in a riff, and so was the bass player. Chris used to get stuck on a riff, and we had this prearranged agreement that the key of the song, if we, you know how trucks have these runoff places full of gravel to stop them on big steep hills.
If the brakes give out. Yeah,
if the brakes give out. Well, we used to have that sort of thing on every song. But the agreement was, if we were stuck on a riff, as soon as we got eye contact, twice more and go to the opening of the song and start again, because it's live and it's our live version, you see. So
yeah.
That was the sneak, and we got quite good at that. And so if you've got a good tight band, I mean, there are only 3 of us, so, you know, there's only one person to blame if the guitar's up the creek. There's only one bass player to blame. And so when you take something like your BB King band, the big band, with topping out at what, 10 or 12 musicians, if you've got a full section,
sure,
12, you've got a drummer, a bass player,
because they have a horn section, and
2 singers, an organ player, a piano player. I mean, you're not talking a small band. And then if the TV's in tow, probably a few string players, you know. That's a heck of an undertaking, especially if you're going to have because very often if they put the classical musicians in there as well, they'll have the dots and they can't vamp. So
well, and some musicians and bands changed more than others. They would make these changes more frequently and use them to greater effect, whereas some would play in a style that's often referred to as sort of a drone style, like Howlin' Wolf on his harmonica, or John Lee Hooker with the way he played his guitar, or even in his vocal. It would almost become a drone where he would just kind of stay in the zone of that one note over and over and over again. Jimmy Reed's another one that would do that quite often. Speaking of one-man band-ish kind of guys that play harp and guitar at the same time, pun intended. You know, that sort of Howlin' Wolf would use a lot of tremolo or vibrato as he was drawing the notes in, but he wasn't going up and down on the harp a lot, you know, like on the turnaround, you know, when you're going like da 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 da, you know, he would it was just ba 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 ba, like just a very sort of a droning kind of the way he played, and he didn't do a lot of, you know, big chord changes all the time.
Well,
you know,
sorry,
like he would do a lot of, instead of trilling on a harp like a lot of the Chicago guys did. You have to remember the Wolf started in Memphis, much like BB King started in Memphis. So again, that's similar sort of style with a lot of swing, which later became rhythm and blues and rock and roll. That's why rock and roll kind of tends to have that backbeat and that swing to it as well. But, you know, instead of playing like the Chicago guys where he would play like that to go that sort of trill note, instead he would just flex his throat, the back of his throat, and just do like a. So when he would do the turnaround, for him it was just like he would just he would kind of do like a like that sort of thing, and you're thinking, wow, he's just really beating the hell out of that note. But for a lot of these guys, it really worked, because there was only one John Lee Hooker. I mean, nobody can copy John Lee Hooker. Nobody can copy the Howlin' Wolf.
Precisely, you can try, but you haven't got the touch. And one of the, it's interesting. I'm just reading what Riff says. The shredders are lost in gear and exact musical theory names. The blues masters were not. They focused on innovating the existing techniques and squeezing as much emotion from them. Absolutely, that's the best thing you can have on stage. Passion. If you play one note with a ton of passion, it's better than, to my mind anyway, about 600 notes in a bar. It loses any musical credibility for me. I mean,
Sure, and sometimes
you
knowing when
think of Route
not to play a
66.
note,
Sorry?
and sometimes knowing when not to play a note. I mean, Junior Wells as a blues harp player is one of my favorites, but technically he's not as good as Little Walter. Little Walter, Muddy Waters' original harp player, was everybody considers the blues harp player of all time. Junior Wells is in no way technically as sound as Little Walter, but I still rank him up there as one of the greats because he didn't play as many notes as Little Walter did, but he knew when not to play a note to create that dramatic effect where here's where you're expecting a bend or a note and nothing comes and it's silent just for a second, and then he comes in with something else unexpected.
Or a pedal, a well-timed pedal can work very, very effectively. And then chucking a little lick. So you're playing along, you're singing, then there's a backbeat going on and a swinging shuffle pattern going on. If you like the guitar riff or the piano riff woo, you know, but even better than that, a half damped hammer on can be a tremendous useful thing, or a scrape as well on the guitar. You can be playing along. I know 9 Below Zero did
like
that.
That sort of half that sort of ties into how they would bend with piano would be they would sort of mash two keys almost but not quite simultaneously, one just a split second after the other, which sort of made it sound like they were bending the note, much like how you bend a guitar string. And I always talk about how Otis Spann was one of the masters of that. He was Muddy's piano player after Muddy went up to Chicago. And I believe they were cousins also. Cool. But another great, the Boogie Woogie guys were fantastic at doing that. Like the guys who backed up, Big Joe Turner, and the guys that played for Howlin' Wolf, like Lafayette Leak, and these Pine Top Perkins types of players, or even to some extent the Professor Longhair, Dr. John style players. That sort of barrel house boogie woogie style of piano. And Little Richard, just bringing it back to him for a second, he's the perfect example of these early rock and roll pioneers, because he took gospel, he took blues, he put it to piano to give it that boogie woogie, that danceable thing. But he was one of these guys that was mashing the keys to bend the notes, to keep that blues feel and to keep it sort of rooted in that blues gospel sound. But that barrel house and boogie woogie style made it really appealing. And that's why he was able to cross over and work his way into what became known as R&B and eventually rock and roll. So he crossed the race boundaries just by slightly tweaking styles of music that he was already very familiar with, much like Ray Charles did with gospel and blues, and created soul music by the way he played the piano.
The way it developed, from what I can say, what's that Zoom says? You've reached a new level when you compose during the solos, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Only you go bat, let the chords come out, bat, bump, and pick up again. It's great when you can get your band to that stage. And one of the things, talking of which, of not playing, is to pass a rhythm pattern or a riff around the band. And it sounds easy, but it's actually really difficult to do. Do you know what I mean? When you've got either a complementary rhythm pattern for the drums or a riff that that complements, and you pass it around the band. So the riff plays in the bass, then it plays in the strings, and it plays in the keyboard, then it plays on the guitar, and the drummer plays a reference to it as well. And then there's a moment's silence, and then the whole band cracks up again.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you mean.
Do you know what let's say it peels right back. I remember watching, oh God, what do you call that? He's a really old guy, jazz player, saxophonist, crying out loud, London fella. Ronnie Scott. I went to see Ronnie Scott. Interesting story. I know it's jazz, but anyway, just take a turn to Jazzville for a second. I went to see Ronnie Scott.
Jazz is great. Jazz and blues are brothers. So
Yeah, I was. This is in Faversham on in the south east of England, in Kent. If we're looking, it's sort of west of Canterbury, and I got given this ticket to see Ronnie Scott. Anyway, I didn't know really who Ronnie Scott was. I heard him on the radio, a saxophonist and a guy who brought on young musicians, and he was a great innovator and very, very well regarded, world famous and all the rest of it. Great sax player. Well, I was at this gig and it was packed. Absolutely. You've never seen anything like it. It was monstrously packed. And this old guy barged me, and I thought, who are you? It's like, caretaker, bugger off, what are you doing? Anyway, the caretaker carried on going and picked up the sax and started on stage. So I have the dubious honour of half barging Ronnie Scott.
Way to go.
Because he literally barged his way through the crowd. I didn't see him. I didn't mean to barge. Well, I didn't barge him. He barged me. So, and I was a bit annoyed. And I thought, oh, who's that? With the scruffy guy in the jacket, old fool. What are you doing? Oh, that's Ronnie Scott. Oh, my goodness me. Oh, dear. So we went to the front. I'd got a ticket at the front. We had this little table, a couple of colleagues and I, and we sat there at the front, and there was a big roundish fella on drums, and Ronnie Scott was playing the sax, and he had a young, shall we say, an understudy, if you like, not an what do you call him, an apprentice playing the sax, and he was dynamite. God knows who they were. And they had this amazing piano player with a massive concert Steinway Grand on piano, and the drummer was really restrained all night. Well, right at the end, they let him loose for, must have been 20, it felt like 20 minutes. It was a heck of a drum solo. And he was sweating and slamming the living daylights out of the guitar, and I've totally lost the point of what I was trying to say. Oh, that's right. Yeah, sorry. And so the band did their solo, and they did it a few times. They didn't do every song because obviously it gets wearing, but each person did a little solo where everybody peels back to a backbeat or little stabs. And Ronnie Scott, of course, went last, and it was just awesome. And anyway, this drummer started playing, and oh wow, I've never seen drumming like it. And this guy looked like he was going to have a coronary. He must have been 20 stone, 25. He was enormous, and I don't mean slim and tall. He was a big lad, and he was sweating like. But what a drummer, man! Anyway, so then when they'd done the solos, light riff, where is it? It says. I lost the point now. Yeah, like Zoom says, they pause. And somebody goes and pause, and they had little moments where it's just them, and it's sweet. And they weren't playing anything particularly challenging. It was just right. Do you know what I mean? And they just pick, like, if you're like, oh, gosh, this sounds really pretentious. This little touch here of salt and pepper and spice, rather than take the lid off and just chuck it everywhere like these shredder guitarists. Or shredder pianists, or
sure.
Because basically,
well,
I don't.
There's a time and a place for shredding, though. There's a time. I mean, if part of what we talk about in blues all the time is the feel, and if the mood strikes you to go off on an explosive orbit, then by all means, I mean, a la Buddy Guy, a la Stevie Ray Vaughan,
yeah,
a la,
Steve,
a la Jeff Healey. These guys that would go on these wild, flourishing roller coaster rides of solos. But the thing is, they take you along with them,
Yeah, and they're blues players, so they get a pass.
Well, and it's still a very engaging way that they play these shredding licks and these solos. Yeah. It's still so amazing. And it's the right balance between that passion or that emotion and that skill set, or that the the
But
sort
it's
of
varied.
proper musical theory sort of idea, right?
True.
That's a
But
fine
when you
line to
talk
walk.
about Stevie
Guys that
Ray
are good
Vaughan,
at it, really good at it.
when you mentioned Stevie Ray Vaughan as a shredder, I just think he was a virtuoso. I mean, you listen to something like Rude Mood, just keeping the back riff going, and
Yeah,
the
the boogie
drummer's
woogie.
playing a hell
That's
of
a
a
boogie
pattern, by the
woogie.
way,
Yeah.
over through it. If you listen to it, it's a real challenging pattern by all accounts. Now, he's got so many things going on in that song that it's not overindulgent at all. He's got the and the chord bit. I can't get anywhere close to that. I could hardly do the opening riff.
I know,
So
it's absolutely
it's
unbelievable.
an absolute stunning piece of work. And I remember a few years ago listening to a blues. We have a Radio 2 on Radio 2 over here. We've got blues. It's the mouth organ fella from Manfred Mann's band. What do you call him? Art player. Yeah, he's the presenter. Anyway, they were interviewing this guy and they were talking about Stevie Ray Vaughan recording an album. And all day, Stevie Ray Vaughan didn't play one lick twice. All day. Think about what that means. Right? You find a nice lick. What do? We go back and repeat it, put a twist on it, go back, repeat it, put a twist on it, put a slide on it, change the octave, fiddle about with it, take one riff, take the idea, develop it, slide in between the boxes and do all this stuff, right?
That's why I encourage people. That's why I encourage a lot of people. I encourage all of you folks listening in. By the way, I just want to remind everyone that they're tuned into Harp and Guitar, People and Music, and welcome to Blues Chat number 6. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Riff Magos, Zoom, Janet, Benjamin, Warrior. Thanks a lot for all the support, for joining us here. We really appreciate that, and all of you who are listening in. It's a great pleasure to host this with my good pal Monk Music here today. But yeah, that's the thing, is that the blues it's always been an enigma, in the sense that it's always been very hard to define, because there are so many different styles, because it did spread so quickly through many regions of the United States at a time when things took a lot, it took a lot longer for somebody to have a direct relationship of communication, or a way of communicating, let's say somebody in Kentucky with somebody in Texas. It wasn't like it is today. So you ended up with all of these different styles and all of these different things infusing this music that over the period of about 50 years finally solidified itself. But by then it had all of these different influences, different regional styles that had come out. Guys like Stevie Ray Vaughan were part of this tradition, or this link that you could still trace back to the early days of that Texas region, with guys like I mentioned earlier, Blind Lemon, or guys like T-Bone Walker, or Johnny Winter, who's also from Texas. And each state can lay claim to really, really great bluesmen. In some cases, even down to just regions, or plantations, or farms, or cities, like Chicago, or Stovall's plantation, or it's amazing how you still, even though Texas boogie woogie sounds much different than a Professor New Orleans style of blues, hear and see the link, or the connection between the two styles, especially when you listen to somebody like T-Bone, because he bridges both, right? He's got that jazz influence from Louisiana, but he grew up in Texas later on. So he's got a little bit of the best of both worlds there.
True. Plus their techniques change as they go through their career. Obviously, we mentioned B.B. King.
Sure, yeah.
They find their niche, if you like, and they develop that, and then they hone it and hone it and hone it till it's second nature. So that's the great thing, because then you can listen to a record and go, oh, obviously if you listen plenty, you can know that's a Buddy Guy, that's a BB King, and that's Buddy Guy sounding like BB King. Or that's a Rory Gallagher with the aggressive and the really strong riff feel to it, and all this stuff. So very interesting. Somebody's mentioned rockabilly. Sam Phillips really helped innovate the sound with people like Junior Parker and Ike Turner to almost single-handedly creating rockabilly.
Yeah, rockabilly was basically rhythm and blues for white people.
Yeah, exactly.
It was, and rockabilly was, I mean, the early days. It's
not an easy form.
Sam Phillips had Memphis Recording Service and later Sun Records, and under both companies or both labels, he recorded blues guys, and then after a while, he was recording blues guys and rockabilly guys. So he would record guys like Howlin' Wolf and James Cotton, but then he would also record guys like Roy Orbison and Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lee Lewis was heavily influenced by guys like, you know, these early boogie woogie blues piano players, and also gospel as well, right? So Jerry Lee Lewis, you know, was kind of a rockabilly, but he was kind of a bluesman too. Elvis in his early career was also kind of a bluesman as well. I mean, speaking of Junior Parker, I mean, that was a Junior Parker hit, and later Elvis recovered aforementioned Big Mama and the other ones too. Rockin' at Midnight was an old an old track, a blues shouter from the 40s. So yeah, Sam Phillips was a catalyst for sure. He and he had a connection with Chess Records. He did a lot of recordings and would send the recordings up for Chess, and Chess would actually press the record. They had a contract and kind of worked together. And Sam Phillips also did some recording for Modern, and Modern would press the records. Modern was out of I think Los Angeles, California, and of course Sun Records was in Memphis, Tennessee, and Chess was up in Chicago.
Well, with rockabilly, I plowed completely. It's a difficult genre, is rockabilly.
It's great stuff. There's a lot of good stuff.
Very, very. Yeah, I tried to get into well, over here in the early 80s, mid 80s, we had the Stray Cats come over.
Yeah, they were great.
Runaway Boys, Sexy and 17, and of course the classic Stray Cat Strut. We did used to play Stray Cat Strut, and that used to get them up and dancing. Then we'd do one of our songs, and then they'd all go and sit down.
Yeah.
They're playing their own song. Right, get a drink.
I mean, there was a lot of guys that, I mean, that rockabilly was, I mean, the way I look at it is you have rock and roll, and before that it was basically rockabilly, and before that it was rhythm and blues. And rhythm and blues is basically just jump blues. It's, you know, boogie woogie. It's guys like Big Joe Turner. Yeah. You know, a lot of the songs that Jerry Lee Lewis recorded were either Big Joe Turner songs or Little Richard songs. And
the rockabilly stuff was
you can see the linkage, the lineage, you know.
I've only got 5 strings on here. You'll have to forgive me. Yeah, it's that's Stray Cat Strut, but once you start looking at the sets of solos, they're challenging. There really are some weird things going on. And he did this thing called hybrid picking, where he'd fold his plectrum up into his finger and then just use his fingers to get that really piercing treble. And interesting, same model of guitar as my mate Gary used to have, the posh Gretsch. Same model. But yeah, it's a genre I absolutely plowed at.
I just want to touch on something else too about that whole time period of, you know, right when Memphis Recording Service was switching to Sun Records and Sam Phillips was recording bluesmen and rockabilly guys. That's where sort of blues, rhythm and blues, rockabilly, rock and roll kind of all branched off, and that the explosion and exposure of one helped to propel its brother or its cousin. So as rock and roll got to be more popular, even back in the 50s, people were looking back to see, well, where did this come from? And then they were discovering rhythm and blues. And then they would look back and they would see that it came from blues. And also at the same time as rockabilly and rhythm and blues and rock and roll, there was also Western swing, which eventually became known as country, what we today would call country music. But Western swing was basically blues recorded by, for the most part, white men that were performing blues songs, and they were doing a lot of bending, and they had some influences from the string bands of the previous generation, like the Memphis Sheiks and the Mississippi Sheiks and the Memphis Jug Band. But Western swing was exactly how it sounds. It was country and Western music, but had a swing to it because it was influenced by, again, that jazz influence. So that's why early country music wasn't the twanginess of rockabilly, but it didn't quite have the quick upbeat of rock and roll. It was sort of in between, and it had a lot of jazzy feel to it. Western swing still used stuff like fiddles and banjos, but they also used the lap steel guitar. With that, they would use that slide. So again, they get that sort of bluesy sound with the sliding. Like I said, they bent notes. They used a lot of boogie woogie piano, and then they started incorporating some horn sections too, much like rhythm and blues was doing. So again, there was that other sort of finger that was branching off and expanding as well with that Western swing stuff. Guys like, Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, Hank Williams, like early Hank Williams stuff. Because Hank Williams wasn't really rockabilly, but he wasn't really blues, but he wasn't country and Western. He did have a bit of a swing to his band did have a bit of a swing to it. So he was definitely one of those Western swing kind of guys.
I've always wondered, by the way, I don't know if I've asked you this, I probably haven't, totally forgotten, but where does bluegrass come into all this?
Bluegrass comes from, is blues also, but it comes, it influenced more into the hill country and into sort of some of the states immediately to the north of Mississippi and the Florida Panhandle. Once you get into sort of Kentucky and Georgia and that sort of area, and basically it's still folk music, but it's starting to get a lot more of the influence of European music, played on banjo and in jug band sort of styles, but more of like Irish jigs starting to really influence the music a lot, as opposed to being influenced a lot more from the Southern blues. Right. It was being influenced from European music coming from the northern states.
Right.
Most notably the Irish stuff.
Right.
Irish and Scottish stuff, that sort of thing.
Hence the major feel to them then. I mean, there's certainly no blues feel. It's more, like you say, a jig.
Yeah, it's meant to be. It didn't spring up out of work songs and field hollers. It sprang out of dance numbers. But it came out of the folk tradition, much like field hollers and proto blues and pre blues did. But it tends to evolve more around the musical instruments and the playing of the instruments. And I mean, you could an ensemble, but of course you could still have a fantastic solo, banjo player that would just play and sing on his own. But it didn't come from the work songs. But it was still like I said, a folk song in the sense that it still spoke to the issues or the topics of the day. when they would sing, they would still sing about, their trials and tribulations and that sort of thing, much like blues. It's just by then it had much more of that, like I said, that Irish or Scottish feel to it.
I know. Wanting to riff my zoom. You jammy devil, zoom. See what he's put? Yeah, the Brian Setzer model Gretsch. I bet he didn't have much money after that, because they're not cheap. They're great guitars.
Yeah, Gretsch guitars are, yeah, you're right. They're not cheap.
Yeah, they do a cracking solid body guitar as well. Used to follow a band called Kings of the Delmar, punk band, of course. And they couldn't half play. When they were on a quiet moment, they could knock out the blues. And great band. But if you watch them, you'll think, crying out loud, that's a bit scary. But and they were big, and they were really tough-looking hombres, but they were a cracking band. And they could blues as well as do the punk stuff, but they, But anyway, they had these Gretsch solid body guitars, and they had real good bit of mid-range on them, which I liked. Whereas the Gretsch have got a lot of that. What's it? You've put zoom, cool twang, and you get that from having really quite thin strings and getting quite aggressive in your attack, pulling off the string. At least that's what I can see from Brian Setzer.
Yeah. So, I like Brian Setzer. I like
he's a corking guitar. Yeah,
and I like his
guitar player.
I like his other side projects that he's doing now, like the Brian Setzer Orchestra and Brian Setzer Trio and that sort of thing. And it's funny, a lot of these blues guys do eventually end up kind of, I don't know if it's an age thing or something, but it seems like Jeff Healey sort of went back to more of a jazz thing, and he's always been a jazz trumpet player as well as a blues guitarist. But I seem to recall in the decade before he passed, he kind of went back to playing jazz trumpet and singing as opposed to playing the guitar. And, a lot of these guys do sometimes go back to that more of that sort of jazzy feel. Brian Setzer being one of them, right? With his Brian Setzer Trio, which is definitely like a jazz trio.
Didn't know he had a Brian Setzer Trio.
Yeah, so and the Brian Setzer Orchestra.
Didn't know that. I know about his orchestra because I was in the UK touring.
Yeah, the Brian Setzer Orchestra is sort of bluesy, rockabilly, sort of swing. It's very good. And then his trio is more of a jazz, sort of a. I guess if I was to compare it, I would compare it to the old school trios, like the Lowell Folsom Trio, where Ray Charles kind of got his start up in the Pacific Northwest. They're up in Seattle and that sort of thing, and then down into California, where it's a 2 or 3 piece band and they do blues and jazz numbers.
All right, okay. Is it a? I did have a video of Brian
3 or 4 piece band, I should say. Sorry. So you'd have like an upright slap bass, a keyboard, and then Brian would sing and play guitar, kind of deal.
Do you know, I've only seen upright slap bass twice. I had a band over here, and this young lad, he'd only be about 25, he'll be 35 now, it must be 10 years ago. And he was slapping the living daylights out of this bass, double bass. It's awesome. And he wasn't even looking. Sorry, 3 times. It was the Big Town Playboys. They had a double bass, upright bass. He was a good.
The Stray Cats bass player played the upright bass. Lee Rocker. He's a great bass player. He's got his own band now.
No, sorry, I was thinking live. Actually being in, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's important to see these.
Didn't the drummer of this? Pardon me, I keep standing over you. Sorry.
That's fine.
Because I can't see you.
Delay.
No, it's not that I can't see you to, pardon the bad manners on the Blues Channel of choice. Harp and guitar, people and music. Apologies. Yeah,
that's because we've both got the same avatar today. That's why.
Yeah. Didn't the drummer have Stray Cats go out with that Swedish lass, Brett Eklund?
I don't know. Possibly.
Could have sworn he did. Anyway, that's by the by. We're talking about the blues and people and music. Well, I suppose that's people, isn't it?
Yeah, that's people.
Yeah. Yeah, Brian Setzer. Is that right? Zoom, zoom. Yeah, Billy Gibbons played Gretsch, solid bodies with light strings. So you get that real twang because it slaps back onto the neck. I'm just wondering if the slap bass and all the slap stuff in the 80s was influenced by, it'd be interesting to find out where they got it from. I'm sure it must be the slap bass. You know, people like Level 42 guy.
In the 80s, there was this whole sort of swing music and jive music sort of revival for some reason. I think it came out of the movies. There was a couple of movies that came out at that time that featured swing and big band and swing dancing and jive dancing. And it sort of propelled where you ended up with bands coming out of nowhere like the Zip Gun Daddies or whatever, and the, you know, Royal Crown Review, and you know, the Cherry Poppin' Daddies, and all these bands that kind of came out and they were doing this swing or big band sort of thing. When meanwhile, guys like, you know, Brian Setzer had already been doing that for a couple of decades, you know, with Stray Cats and his other projects.
Yeah, they were great.
The riffs mentioning Scotty Moore, yeah, he was a great innovative rockabilly picker. He was a great guitar picker.
Yeah, and lightning fast.
I also like Carl Perkins. Carl Perkins was another great guitar picker as well. He could play blues or he could play rockabilly. Carl Perkins.
Scotty Moore, didn't he have that enormous Gibson with a big thick somebody put zoom, you'll know. Didn't he, Scotty Moore, have that big Gibson with a big single cutaway? Ridiculous looking thing. Great big old thick body on it. An arch top.
Zoom Zoom's also talking, yeah, about Billy Gibbons, and he's gotten all fancy now. Billy Gibbons is going by Billy F. Gibbons now, and I think if it's not out already, it's coming out very shortly, a new blues album. And I've heard a couple of tracks from Billy Gibbons' new album, and it's pretty good. He covers some Robert Johnson stuff, and he's got some of his some original stuff. So it's pretty good.
Well, I did try one time a Kenny Burrell solo, so I'm not very good at. I've only been at it for 20 years. Seriously, I still can't. It's the solo for Morgan Grinder's Swing, and
that's why I emulate Junior Wells' harp playing style as opposed to Sonny Boy's, because there's no way I could ever play like Sonny Boy, but I can kind of copy Junior Wells.
Yeah, I mean, I could learn how to do it, but the amount of time I'd have to put into it, I could be learning stuff I'm really into more. You know what I mean? It's not. See, with all that's the strange thing with this journey, if you like. There's nothing after a certain while you can't play. You've just got to have the inclination and the willingness to put 6 or 7 hours a day in for 3 weeks, and you're fine. It just nails it. I mean, in one beat, you know, that's what you got to be prepared to do. So in the end, you just then ES295 Scotty. Is that what it was? Is that a Gibson? Sounds like it, yes.
See, the worst thing that can happen to me if I play my harp too much is I get chapped lips. I mean, I'm not going to hurt my shoulder or anything like that.
Hang on a minute. I'm just looking up the ES295. I just want to see a picture of it. ES295. Oh, right. Oh, right. I know it's not as big as I thought. I'm thinking of a big. Hang on a minute. ES295. The arch top. Ah, there it is. The one I'm looking at has got a big single cutaway, and it was a dark. Yeah, that's it. Memphis 52 ES297. So 295. It's got a big horrible old sharp cutaway. That's the one. Yeah, I was right. And some of them have a softer cutaway, but the one I remember was a big sharp thing, and it was a sort of a black. Oh, there it is. Black reverb. That's the one. I'm sure it was that. Man, you saying that. The TV in those days was black and white, so it could have been any color.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I remember black and white TV when I was young.
Yeah, I didn't think that through at all, did I? Oh, yeah, well, I think it's a grey guitar. Yeah, well, it's black and white, so it could have been black. It could have been anything, couldn't it?
Could have been blue, could have been green, you don't know. Yeah, Gary Moore started out as pretty much a rock and roll guy and then slid into blues. But I mean, if you're an accomplished enough rock and roll player, you've got the blues foundation already built into that style of music anyway. And Gary Moore, as Monk has mentioned, he can play B.B. King like B.B. King, and a lot of the rock guitarists a lot of them named B.B. King I mean, almost all the blues guitarists will cite B.B. King and Buddy Guy, but a lot of the rock and roll guys will also cite B.B. King and Buddy Guy as well, because B.B. King did kind of, he was blues, he was soul blues, but he was blues rock also. He, you know, that steamroller, that swing of his band could really get right into that pocket, right into that groove.
Sorry,
speaking, by the way, riff, I know you kind of dig, because I also kind of dig on him too, Tony Joe White, who just recently passed away, actually. But he's, I think just prior to his passing, he released an album. I think it was maybe a year ago or so. The only reason I'm bringing up is because it's on rotation on B.B. King's Bluesville satellite radio on Sirius XM that I listen to at work. My boss spoils us and he gives us satellite radio to listen to at work. So when I'm working on my shift, I always put it on B.B. King's Bluesville. And there's a Tony Joe White song on there I hear it at least once, sometimes twice in a shift. And I think it's, what's it called? Just quickly see if I can find
while you're looking for that, I've just sent you a picture of Scotty Moore, the guitar I was remembering it when it was black. I've sent you the picture of him, the one I remember. And he had a goat. Obviously, he had more than one, but that's the one I remember. And I thought it was just a bit daft for the size of it, you know. Nice looking guitar, but it was just, I don't know. Considering at the time you got the choice, you could have a Les Paul when a lot smaller body. I just think, well, to me, it always look out. Anyway, it's just personal preference. Just looked a bit outsized. That's all.
Oh, okay. Here we go. The song is called "Bad Mouthin'." It was from an album that he released in looks like 2018, June-ish, June or around June of 2018. He released an album with this track called "Bad Mouthin'." I think the album's also called "Bad Mouthin'."
This is Tony Joe White.
Tony Joe White, yeah. And then he passed away October 24th of 2018 in Tennessee. Yeah, so the song's called "Bad Mouthin'," and the album's called "Bad Mouthin'," if I'm not mistaken. It's a really, really good track. I really like it. It's kind of in blues, it's what we call a slow drag. Nice and swampy.
I'll get up every morning, fix me something to eat, walk into the kitchen, just stand at my feet, then you start bad mouthing me. Then you bad mouthing me.
As nice and cool as that.
That's great, isn't it? Yeah. It's very Jimmy Reed. It's very Slim Harpo. It's that nice swampy bluesy sound. That's my favorite, is the swampy stuff. That's my favorite sound in the blues. That's sort of grimy, sweaty, juke joint kind of a sound. And he's so great at that slow drag style of blues. Rest in peace, Tony Joe White, a great bluesman. He's got links to Mississippi and to Muscle Shoals, and he did all the outdoor music festival circuits of the 60s and 70s.
God, you know some stuff.
He had that fantastic hit, "Polk Salad Annie." Monk, that sounded great. Do you mind queuing up "Polk Salad Annie"? Polk salad.
Hang on a second. What's it called? Polk
Yeah, Polk, Polk Salad Annie. That's he's most famous for that, and I'm sure he got tired of playing it live because everybody requested it. But it's such a great
Joe
track.
White, Polk Salad on the original black and white. Here we are. Let me just turn this mic.
Yeah, the way you had it sounded great when you did his other one, Bad Mouthing.
Just on it. Don't want to break the thing. Right, here we go. And oh, hang on, I've messed up. Here we go. Nice bass.
Some of y'all never been down south too much. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about this so that you understand what I'm talking about. Down there we have a plant that grows out in the woods and the fields. Looks something like a turnip green. Everybody calls it poke salad. Poke salad. Used to know a girl lived down there and she'd go out in the evenings and pick her a mess of it, carry it home and cook it for supper. Cause that's about all they had to eat. They did alright. And down in Louisiana, where the alligators grow so mean, there lived a girl that I swear to the world made the alligators look tame. Poke salad Annie, poke salad Annie. Everybody said it was a shame, cause her mama was a working on a chain gang. A mean, vicious woman. Every day for supper time, she'd go down by the truck patch and pick her mess of poke salad and carry it home in a tow sack. Poke salad Annie, the gators got your granny.
That's just fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And then he comes into a great. Then he breaks into a nice harmonica solo in there too, and
swinging, man.
Man, he was great. I really liked Tony Joe White.
Yeah, the riffs he chucked in are fantastic. Right up my street, those little hammer-on.
That was a different version though. There's a version that has a beautiful horn section that comes in when he goes poke salad Annie. Then they come in with the da. Gators got your granny. Chomp. Chomp, chomp, chomp. And there's a little bit of a horn section that kind of comes in a few times throughout the song. And it's really, really great. So that was a different version, but yeah.
See if you can find it. Hang on.
That doesn't matter. Either way, that was a great version too.
Joe Dustin.
That might have been the version that he would lip sync to when he would appear on television.
Yeah, that's what he was doing. And the rest are all live. Captain Luke does it as well, apparently, 1926. Have a listen.
Yeah, Tony Joe White. Yeah, really good. Bad mouth me, baby.
So again, this is Captain Luke from 1926.
Tell you a little bit down south. Where you take our plants and greens, grows out in the woods and fields. Looks something like collard green, turnip green, even crease green.
I'll tell you what, between that version I've just heard there, was a little run that was very John Lee Hooker. And when the other fellow was doing it, it reminded me of certain aspects of Jimi Hendrix with the hammer-ons. Interesting.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I wouldn't mind you sending me the link to that one you were just playing. That sounded interesting.
Oh, the one just playing.
I'm not entirely sure it's a 1926 recording. It sounds a little bit too clear.
A bit clean, yeah. It says 1926, but anyway. Yeah, that's what they're saying in the timeline. It says love the song, but got to call BS on the timeline. Can't be 26. Unless it's been really cleaned up, but not. No, in 1926 they didn't even have tape recordings. I don't think they had the cylinder recording still. Yeah, so or the wax. Anyway, just a minute. I'm sending you the link.
I mean, 1920. The oldest record I have is from 1927 or 1928, and it's very, very good condition. It's graded professionally and certified as in very good condition. It's not mint or near mint, and it doesn't sound nearly as clear as that.
No, that wasn't 26. You can, unless it's been seriously messed about with. That was clear as a bell. It might have been. It was written in 1926, but that wasn't.
Yeah, that could be. That could be.
Or he was born in 1926. More like.
It could be that it was a modern, version of a song of that time. Maybe it's from sheet music from 1926. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the picture shows a really old guy, but in the background is a guy with an inverted baseball cap. So it's probably when he was born. I don't know. It doesn't matter. He's playing a really old national guitar, isn't it? Gibson. No, I don't think it's any of those. Anyway, there you go. Right, I'm beginning to cave in now, Whiskey. So
yeah, I know it's getting late for you.
Yeah, well, it's not that. I'm just been up since ridiculous this morning, but yeah, just harking back a little to this album. It really, I'm looking forward to playing that this weekend. But we need to get our act together and get these interviews done, because I've been very remiss. I mean, we've lined how many up? 3 or 4.
Yeah,
and so need to do that, and also reach. So just so we're talking Ben Ruth, 9 Below Zero, Dennis Greaves with a bit of luck, the guy Phil Saunders, the guy I sent you the link to, that blues one that video I saw filmed, and have I missed anybody? Oh, and I think by the sounds of it, we need to interview Zoom and Riff, because Riff.
Oh yeah, we've had Riff on here on the show before. Yeah, it'd be great to get both of them.
What am I saying? Sorry,
it'd be great to get both of them in. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, of course. I'm being gosh. Yeah. I am tired. I'm so sorry, Riff. Pardon me. Yeah, and TJW did a killer version of Boom Boom.
He's saying that Pokes That Out. Yeah, Elvis did cover Pokes That Out. He used to do it live quite often, actually. And yeah, they became friends. Elvis was friends with Junior Parker as well. Mystery Train. You know, Elvis was brought up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and then later on he moved to Memphis, Tennessee. And Elvis's family were dirt poor, and much like Johnny Cash, who was whose family were sharecroppers, and much like Tony Joe White, the lyrics in one of his songs, when you work in the fields together, you don't have time to think about another man's color. I mean, everybody was broke and hungry and poor, and everybody got a little bit of a feeling or a sense of relief and release through the music, through their style of folk music. And at that time, in that area in the South, more often than not, it was blues music. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think we should probably wind this thing down here for today. But yeah, thanks a lot, Monk, as always, for joining me here today and co-hosting. It's always a pleasure to chat the blues with a fellow blues aficionado.
I don't know about an aficionado. Let's call me an enthusiast. You're enthusiast. You're the aficionado. You mean you drag these things out from nowhere? Yep, so I'll play a riff and you'll go, yep, that reminds me of the B-side of second verse, bloody song. I know that's a bit of an extreme exaggeration, but you know what I mean. You can identify stuff.
Yeah, but I still get stumped all the time because there's just so much out there. I mean, you got to think, basically 100 years of recorded musical history. There's hundreds and thousands of blues songs out there that have been recorded and are still around. You can still find them. Stuff going back through the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, in the time period that we've been kind of focusing on here right now today with the 50s and then the 40s. But going back to the 20s, man, there was some great stuff out there, and you can definitely hear the link, as Monk Music alluded to earlier in this stream, about how one musician would teach or mentor another, and you could hear and see the link from one musician to the other, going back to previous generations. So I think I want to just quickly close it out here with another little quick blurb from Buddy Guy's book, When I Left Home, where he's talking about Guitar Slim and how Guitar Slim influenced him. Just a quick little note here. It says, the minute I heard Guitar Slim was performing at the Masonic Temple Hall in Baton Rouge, I ran over. I was the first guy in line to buy a ticket. It cost 50 cents. The hall had a big ballroom, and I knew the place would be packed with dancers, and all I wanted was to be right up on the bandstand. I wanted to see the man's hands when he played the guitar. It didn't take long before the crowd arrived, and soon it was full. Folks pushing and shoving, but I wasn't moving. Kept my spot so I could see and hear everything. 8 o'clock came and went, then 9 o'clock, then 9:30. At about 9:45, the band came on stage and started playing the opening notice of The Things I Used to Do. Man, my heart skipped a beat. It was like someone had poured a quart of whiskey down my throat. I was warm all over. I heard the music all right, but I didn't see the Guitar Slim. I didn't see Guitar Slim. The guitar kept playing, but there was no guitarist. I thought to myself, where is he? Where the hell is he? And then he goes on to explain that Guitar Slim, it became a tradition for Guitar Slim to begin the opening few notes of the opening song to his live performances off stage, and he would come down through the audience and make his way onto the stage. And I can definitely testify to the fact that that's something that Buddy Guy picked up from Guitar Slim, because Buddy Guy does that as well. Starts all of his shows where his band's on the stage, they open up and jump into the opening song. Buddy, you hear him playing, but you can't see him. And then all of a sudden he walks down from behind the audience or out a side door and makes his way down through the audience and up onto the stage. And it's electrifying and captivating. I've seen him a couple of times, and every time it blows me away.
Cool.
So I think that's going to do it here for today at Harp and Guitar, People and Music, for Blues Chat number 6. We were just talking a little bit about some of the blues legends whose birthdays kind of fall around this day, December 7th here. Sonny Boy Williamson, number 2, Alec Rice Miller, Little Richard, Junior Wells, and the aforementioned Guitar Slim. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us here today. I really appreciate that. And thanks again to Monk Music for helping thanks again to MGTOW Warrior, I should say, for helping Monk Music and I keep an eye on things here. Really appreciate that, Warrior. All right, everyone. All right, my friend. Thank you very much. Any final thoughts here, Monk?
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you, Whiskey. It's just, I get into this stuff, and as you know, we've had many a conversation away from live streams, and we've just looked up and it's, you know, many hours later.
yeah, I do tend to go on, and I'm sorry.
No, that was no by no means criticism.
I get excited and passionate about this stuff.
You know, I could hardly lay that at your lap, kind of the way I go on, but we just get, for those people listening, we just get carried away and go into minute detail on something about, I don't know, plectrums or something, and we'll just go into utter detail. And of course, if it's your passion, it's your passion. There's nothing that can be done about it. It's just the way it is. And like I said, my stock phrase with regard to the blues, it's just great.
Absolutely, it is. It's one of the things that I hold near and dear to me, and it's one of the art forms that I try to practice, and I try to continue to carry and make sure that it, in whatever little way I can, and make sure that the blues is alive and well, and the blues would never die. Yep. So thanks, everyone, for joining Monk Music and myself today. Really appreciate that. And thanks for joining us here in Harp and Guitar, People and Music. If you haven't already, head by our channel's homepage and check it out. Monk's got a lot of stuff on there with guitar technique. And then I've got a lot more of sort of the background or the history behind the music and the people. So if you like what you see, please subscribe and let us know what you think. All right, everyone, have a good one. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.